Hello tea friends. We wanted to make a video to introduce the second edition of our new format of tea books that come out seasonally. This particular edition is really important and wonderful and so substantial that I think it will make a really nice contribution to tea studies and to all tea lovers now and in the future. So it really is worth introducing and discussing a little bit with you. It's been a long time in the making, this particular book. One of the things that we wanted to do with this new, thicker, bigger format is have the opportunity to dive deeper into topics. From the inception of Global Tea Hut, we've always had the idea that we would help to provide English-speaking tea lovers with more information about tea history, processing science, culture, etc. from all of the experts over here in Asia that we've cultivated relationships with, and some of their beautiful teachings be able to translate and provide information, in-depth, substantial information. The tea world is really so vast and so huge, and there are so many nooks and crannies. Even after 30 years of study, I feel like such a beginner, and all the time I turn into various pockets and open a door and there's a giant world of new things to learn. For me, that's so exciting. It keeps me, as a student, it keeps me humble, it keeps me learning, and I'm fortunate that I'm surrounded and connected with some really knowledgeable teachers that we can learn from. And I've always wanted that type of information in English. Long ago, when I first started learning about tea, there really wasn't anything, and good friends of mine had magazines or books on their shelves. Some of them were even publishers of said books and magazines, and I would thumb through them, and my rudimentary Chinese allowed me to read just the teeniest bit, but I would mostly look at the pictures and just wish that I could really dive into some of this information and learn more about this huge and rich and vast world of tea. And so there are plenty of little nooks and crannies and areas of tea exploration and learning that have really never been covered in English, and some of them are really fundamental and important. And we were hoping that with this new thick format, which is essentially a book, that some of the issues, maybe one a year, maybe two a year, who knows, but that some of the issues could really become substantial books diving deep into some of those types of topics. And we did that for this issue. This issue is almost entirely devoted to Mangchan teapots. And Mangchan teapots are a really important part of tea and the history of tea, its heritage, and so essential to those especially who practice Gongfu tea. And yet, there's very little information about Mengchen teapots available in English. So a lot of the things that we're choosing to translate and explore are things we also want to learn about, and we hope that other enthusiastic tea lovers like us will also want to learn about these things. And so I thought I'd make a video and just introduce very briefly what Mengchen pots are and why they're so important, and that will help you to understand why this issue is so substantial. Mengchen pots are essentially four things, and so that can make them a little bit complicated, but I'll try to keep this introduction succinct and brief and to the point. First of all, Mengchen is one of the greatest I Ching masters and teapot creators, and he's attributed with making the first small pots for Gongfu tea. In the late Ming Dynasty, pots were very large because people steeped fewer leaves for long periods of time and then poured it either into bowls or large cups. The reason that Western people often brew tea that way is because that's the time at which Europe, for the most part, started coming in contact and trading and learning about tea. And that's how most people in China at that time prepared tea. And so most of the pots were large. And so Mengchen is attributed as being the creator of the small teapot, but it's unlikely that he actually historically did that. There's only around 11 or 13, depending who you ask, works of art that we can absolutely guarantee 100% were made by Mengchen. One of them is actually a book of paintings. The others are pieces. Many of them are featured in the magazine. And so first of all, a Mangchan pot would of course be a work of art made by Hui Mengchen. Then second, Hui Mengchen, he spent 20 years of his life down in Chaozhou, which is a place that is attributed to be the birthplace of Gongfu tea. That can be a little misleading because Chaozhou was actually a burgeoning metropolis in the south, one of the most economically vibrant cities. And so people were actually moving there from all over. And so really Gongfu tea, like all things tea, is built of things that came before. And that was a melting pot of different cultures, especially from Fujian. And so actually a lot of places went into the creation of Gongfu tea. But most scholars agree that that interaction and development happened in Chaozhou, even though some of the leading actors in making it happen were coming from other parts of Fujian as well. And of course, Wu Yi is very influential in the history of Gongfu tea. We have a lot of issues about the history of Gongfu tea if you're interested in diving more into that topic. But suffice it to say that Gongfu tea really began in what are called the three zhous, which is Chaozhou, Quanzhou, and Fuzhou. And Chaozhou was really the biggest city and the melting pot, so it really gets more of the credit. And Hui Mengchen himself went and lived there for 20 years. And then when he returned to Yixing, he created a workshop called Hui's Corner. I've actually been there to the place where it used to be in Yixing. There's nothing there now, but I placed a flower for all of us to say a little thanks to Hui Mengchen and his descendants. So one of his descendants, which we believe is a great nephew. So Hui Mengchen was his grand uncle, was another very famous teapot maker named Hui Yigong. And Hui Yigong was very smart and he made pieces of his own, and those are considered Mengchen pots too. But he also used the position of their workshop and their connections to Chaozhou to lead the industry in producing this new type of pot that was sent to Chaozhou for Gongfu practitioners. So even in the life of Hui Mengchen, he had a lot of apprentices, and then when we get to the generation of Hui Yigong, there's even more. And most of the other workshops in Yixing were devoted to spending a lot of time, months even, in master crafting those larger pots that were much more popular throughout the rest of China. Like Chen Mingyuan's family, for example, had a workshop, and that's what they made. So those workshops weren't really set up for larger scale production. Of course, we don't mean large scale, because these things are still all handmade, but for larger scale, and also didn't have that connection to that market in Chaozhou, maybe even didn't know that it was going on. And so that unique situation and a little bit of business acumen made the Hui's factory, the Hui workshop, Hui's Corner, instrumental and pivotal in sending a lot of little pots to Chaozhou to be used by Gongfu practitioners. So we have Mengchen pots are the works of Hui Mengchen. Then we have Hui's Corner, the Hui family workshop, and all of the pots that came out of it, right, which were all stamped Hui Mengchen, because Hui Yigong was smart and capitalized on his grand uncle, we think, on his grand uncle's reputation, and so stamped those like a brand, right? So basically, Hui Mengchen is a person, and Mengchen pots are made by him, but then Mengchen pots are also a brand, right? And then the third thing that we get to that Mengchen pots are what are called tributary pots. This is a loose translation, but a lot of pots were stamped with the names of past masters. And this has always happened in Yixing, and it's a big part of tea. This is deep and extends way beyond what we can cover in this video. But on the most practical level, the big names of Yixing, especially after they were long gone, it's not as though people were trying to create fakes necessarily. Of course, there was always a market for fake antiques, but that wasn't the driving force for why the names of past masters were stamped onto pots. Because many of the pots that had that stamp did not resemble anything that the original master had made. So they obviously weren't attempts to fake the original works of their predecessors. One thing they were on a practical level is that they were marks of origin. So a pot that said Da Bin or a pot that said Hui Mengchan meant Yixing. It meant genuine Yixing clay. And this was important because there was a lot of copies being made. And you might wonder, why wouldn't those copies made from clay from other regions also just stamp Da Bin or stamp Hui Mengchan? And the answer is they did. So even though the attempt was to protect the origin of Yixing, it's still they were stamped. For example, a cottage industry of Santo teapots started being made in Chaozhou, and they were all modeled after those Mangchan pots that came from the Hui factory, from the Hui's corner. They were the same shapes, and they were wheel thrown and made from local clay. And some of them maybe were sold as fake ones, but a lot of them weren't. A lot of them were just sold as cheap alternative options for those locals who couldn't afford those Yixing pots that were much more expensive. So there's all these tributary pots, and some of them were stamped with the names of past masters just to signify the origin and ensure that it came from Yixing. But there's more to it than that. There's a whole philosophy that relates to tea and extends really way beyond this video, which has to do with The Unknown Craftsman, which is a wonderful book, right? Soetsu Yanagi, a beautiful, beautiful book about this very thing, about how a lot of works of art, the artists didn't feel the need to attach their ego to them. So the quality of the piece was not about provenance. Much like Michelangelo said, right? The work of art, not the artist, should say, I am. And in that way, there was like a selflessness to it. Because what the artist was saying was that the skills that were used to create this pot were handed down to me by a tradition, right? I have a teacher who had a teacher, and they handed me down these skills to create this pot. So I'm going to put the name of the past master to signify that it is the tradition of Yixing that made this pot, not me. And you might wonder then, well, what about when a master potter innovates? When they adapt, when they create a new form? The answer is they would still stamp the past master. And if you think about it, that makes sense. We try to do that in tea as well. When we make adaptations and innovations, we hand them off to the teachers of the past, because even if you make an innovation, to get to the level where you can make a successful innovation requires lots of training. And so it was the training that got them to the place where they could innovate. And so, of course, they want to hand the credit off to those who have come before. So there's this huge body of tributary work, all stamped Mengchan, right? And so that's the third thing, is those tributary pots. And then fourth, and this is the most important, I mentioned earlier that Mengchan pots and the topic of Mengchan pots is so essential to understanding the history, heritage, and practice of Gongfu tea. And that is because from the period of Qianlong, Qing Dynasty Qianlong, which is 1735 to 1796, from the 18th century all the way up to the mid-20th century, all the way up even really to the 1970s, all Gongfu teapots were called Mengchan pots. Why were they called Mengchan pots? Because of 1, 2, and 3. Really 2 and 3. Because of that workshop, Hui's Corner, and its unique connection to the Gongfu market that was at that time only local. It was a local brewing method. And all the little pots were all going there, and they all said Mengchan. And then we have another, century or two of every pot having Mengchan's name on it. Even those cottage industries in Chaozhou, the Santo, so-called Santo teapots, which are named after the port that they were exported from, which is near to Chaozhou. So all teapots said Mengchan. So it became almost like a brand in the way that we say like Kleenex for tissue, or we say Band-Aid when we want a bandage, right? This in a way, this brand of Mengchan became synonymous with Gongfu teapots. And so almost all literature about Gongfu tea for hundreds of years doesn't say anything about get a good Yixing pot or get a good Zisa pot, many of the ways that we talk today, they all just said a Mengchan pot. You need a Mengchan pot. You need a this and a that and a Mengchan pot. So Mengchan pots are Gongfu teapots. And all Gongfu teapots are Mengchan pots. And the understanding of Mengchan pots is the understanding of teapots for Gongfu tea, from a historical perspective anyway. Obviously, in modern times, we've had innovation since then. And that would be another chapter. That would be a more recent chapter in our understanding of Gongfu brewing. But understanding Mengchan pots is a big part of the history of this brewing method and where it comes from. So we are very honored to be able to translate some of the best and most respected scholars in this field, one of which is a personal hero of mine, Huang Jianliang, who we've covered in past issues. We've introduced him, and we've also translated his articles in the past. So you can find more about him and about his writings in previous issues. But he's a really leading tea scholar in the whole world, one of the best, and a wonderful friend and a wonderful teacher and a wonderful tea lover as well. And we're extremely honored to have his work and other experts and scholars in this issue. We also feature some collections of Mengchan teapots, some collections from, we just selected a few. There's obviously a lot of big collections of Mengchan teapots. If by Mengchan teapot, you're including all four of these things, right? So we've tried to include all of this. We have some of the original works by Hui Mengchan. We have some of the works by Hui Gong and the Hui's factory. We have a lot of those tributary pots, right? And then of course, all of that is all of the when you're using Mengchan pot in its most generic form as all Gongfu teapots, then that's all of those. Part of the magic of Yixing teaware is that it combines three arts, and Mengchan teapots are very famous for this. So of course you have teapot making, but then also engraving and also poetry. So scholars and poets who were often tea lovers would choose the words that signified many things that were important to them. Then master engravers would engrave them. And then of course pot makers would make the pots. And they say that a fine pot deserves a fine engraving. We'll be showing a lot of these types of engravings in the magazine as they're a big part of the history of Mengchan teapots. So there's some collections. We chose a few of the ones that we like and appreciate. So you'll get to see a lot of pots and learn a lot. This is really a book. So it's extremely substantial. And it is such an honor to work on something like this where the entire issue really has nothing to do with our writings or perspectives, but rather it's just a translation of better scholars than us who know a lot more. And we're just acting as humble middle people who can help to translate and convey that information in English. We took that responsibility very seriously. This issue took hundreds of hours to do. There's a lot that went into it. It's taken a long time to put together because it really is a book in and of itself. And we're very excited for it to reach the tea world. I think it makes a beautiful contribution to tea scholarship in the English language, both now and into the future. And I hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoyed creating it for you. Really an honor. You can subscribe to Global Tea and you'll get this issue with 4 beautiful teas. Or you can go on our website if you wish and just buy the book itself, which I highly recommend. No matter what approach you take to tea, this is going to be a contribution to your tea education, I promise. And you're going to love that you have it. We're very, very excited and very thankful for all the support that you give us, which allows us to complete such beautiful projects as this. We hope to complete more projects like this in the future and provide more information for tea lovers so that we can contribute to the conversation of tea and all that goes into tea, and especially really some of our favorite topics like Yixing teaware as well, contribute to that discussion. Hopefully more other authors will start translating, producing, writing in English as well, and we'll get more books and more magazines and more contributions to read and learn and expand our libraries and our education. And this can just be an incentive towards that as well. May it be thus. Even though it's rare and difficult, I hope you all get the chance to drink some wonderful tea brewed with a real Mengchan teapot one day, and that the studying of this magazine will make that all the more richer and more contextualized and with greater understanding and appreciation, because that's what it's really all about. All this learning is about appreciation for the craftsmanship of I Ching. Until next time, enjoy some fine cups of tea.